Well, good evening. We will call this committee of the whole meeting to order. I want to let you know that I received a phone call from John Braden earlier this afternoon. His wife is in the hospital, so he's not able to make it tonight, but please keep them in your thoughts, good thoughts, that she's doing better. So I also want to report to you that I had tried to get the negotiator for the city to come and discuss the union contract, how we go about negotiating union contracts in the Ohio law, that you all asked to be placed into committee, and she was not able to make it this evening. And per the emails that I sent you, Mr. Gary did not feel comfortable. Mr. Gary and Mr. Moore did not feel comfortable being the only person representing, or they could speak to the law, but since they had not been involved in negotiations, they did not feel comfortable with giving us the specifics of Norwood. So I did forward to you information that Mr. Gary forwarded to me, which I found very helpful. The collective bargaining law with notations that he cited that were the most applicable, as well as the fact-finding guidebook and conciliation guidebook. So perhaps after reading those, if you still want to have that in the committee of the whole, I will try to schedule that at a later date, or we can discuss it at the next council meeting to see if it's still something you want to have in committee of the whole. So with that being said, we will move on to the agenda for this evening, and that is for Market Gardens. We had gotten a report from the Planning Commission that the zone change was unanimously rejected, and then we had the public hearing and had the first reading on the ordinance denying the zone change request, and then at the last meeting was placed into the committee of the whole. So Mr. Stoker is here from the representing Planning Commission, and Mr. Orris is here. Do you gentlemen want to come up and give us an overview? You can either sit up there, or I think these microphones are on if you want to come up here and sit instead of standing. You're certainly welcome to do that. All your discussions. So can you tell us the discussion that went on, I guess, at Planning Commission?
Sure, and it may be appropriate for Greg to actually go over the proposal first, and I can describe why the Planning Commission did not.
That'd be good.
Like
okay.
Greg?
Good afternoon, or good evening here. It's Eden Urban Gardens, LLC, with a representative, April Pandora, originally came into our and made an application for a zone change. The property she was interested in is 2161 Lawn Avenue, and right now that's currently owned by the Hamilton County Land Bank program, and she was interested in utilizing that for like a market garden. So it wouldn't be that you have a garden there, but you grow crops there as a business operation that you sell commercially, not on site, but in farmers market or locally. So she had come in order to do that. Currently it's not a permitted use in the city, and she was requesting two modifications from the Planning and Zoning Code. First, we needed a market garden definition, which we currently don't have, and then also the second, and really the biggest crux of this, is allowing market garden as a permitted or conditional use in a residential zone, or R2 specifically is where the property is located. So currently it's not allowed at all. So her request originally obviously would be for permitted, and her backup request was for conditional. The market garden definition, which would be the second part of that, is a site operated and maintained by an individual, organization, or business in cultivating, growing, harvesting of herbs, vegetables, and fruits for sale. So that's the first page, pretty much the breakdown of that. It gives you a description of where this property is. It's been vacant for a while now, at least 10 years, I think, something in there plus. And then we had a first meeting with Planning Commission, and based on their sort of concerns, they had asked that we look at other cities and what their conditional use requirement was. And that's where you see on the second page there, recommendations of if it was allowed as a permitted or conditional use, these would be the standards that would apply to a market garden. And it just kind of goes through, I don't want to read every single one of them, but common sense things to limit the overall nuisance of a market garden. Allow as a conditional use. Standards would be follow after that. Shall not affect the residential feel of a neighborhood. Generate pedestrian or vehicular traffic substantially greater. Mechanical equipment similar in scale to a residential use, like residential tillers. Conducted not to cause offensive or objectionable noise, vibration, odors. Shipment of deliveries should be limited between normal hours of the day. Chemical fertilizers shall not exceed a residential. Overhead lights permitted or prohibited. Rodents and vermin, I think that came up as a concern, so that kept in a normal residential standard. And no selling of vegetables, and the signs would be similar to the residential districts. And accessory structures shall be constructed to the satisfaction of the Board of Zoning Appeals. So that was kind of my rundown of it, and suggestions that I had seen from other communities where this had been done. And then if Jerry would like to kind of go over the Planning Commission meeting.
All yours.
Thank you, Mr.
West.
President. Yeah, the Planning Commission reviewed the request and then also reviewed the documents that Greg had supplied, and they decided not to recommend market gardens within Norwood because of the following. The Planning Commission did not want to have buildable lots underutilized within the community, and I thought this was a big underutilization of land that is just now starting to have new houses built within the community. Can you hear that now?
Speak up a little bit.
Sure. Let me
Air conditioning right overhead.
Let me repeat myself.
Thank you.
Planning Commission decided not to recommend market gardens within Norwood because of the following. Planning Commission did not want to have buildable lots underutilized, and they felt that putting market gardens on buildable lots is a very underutilized situation. We just now are getting new homes built within Norwood after probably over 30 years. That's one of the most important. Secondly, the Planning Commission did not feel that the maintenance of market gardens would be accomplished. Third, Planning Commission was concerned that it would depreciate the surrounding property values of people's homes. Four, the Planning Commission is concerned that, as was mentioned in the document here, that this would be an increase of rodent problems, rats, squirrels, possums, raccoons, and we know that some of those animals can become rabid. And also the Planning Commission is concerned about the type of fertilizers, whether it's natural fertilizer or stuff you buy at Myers, like Scott's, things like that, and the runoff onto other people's property. So those are the main concerns, and those are the reasons why.
Questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Thompson.
I'm curious if these reasons were presented to the applicant.
Yes, she was there.
Okay, and was she given an opportunity to address these issues?
Sure.
In that specific meeting, or to come back, or how was that handled?
She was allowed to make comments there at that meeting, and I believe she did make comments. I couldn't tell you verbatim. I don't write those comments down. Typically, what I do when we do minutes, I do the motion, whether it was approved or not approved. I don't do them verbatim unless it goes to court and somebody can do a transcript of the tapes.
Sure, okay.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. As a follow-up to Mr. Thompson's question, when the rationales were presented, did you feel like those could be overcome?
That's not my decision.
Whose
That's
decision?
That's a Planning Commission's decision.
Okay.
The Planning Commission makes the recommendation, not me.
I don't mean you. I'm saying you because I think you're speaking on behalf of the commission right now. So as a process piece.
Well, obviously they thought it was not. That's the reason they recommended unanimously not to approve.
Okay. I just want to be clear on
Right.
why it was stated that way.
Other comments? There is a lady, yes.
I
Ms.
do have a
Stevenson?
couple more, sorry, I was taking some notes. Are any of those concerns addressed as it relates to property owners growing on their own property? Do we actually have anything on the books already that addresses the fertilizer I might use at my home, depreciation of like,
Single-family homes are already a principal permitted use. You're talking two different types of uses here.
and so my question is, with the use that is in place for a single family, are any of these types of concerns addressed?
Well, sure, rats, possums, raccoons, a lot of things are addressed under either the health department or under the property maintenance code. No, fertilizers and things like that are not. Again, but you're talking two different things here. You're talking about having a use change and a zone change to add a business. This is a business that's going into residential properties. So they have to look at it on a different set of criteria.
Thank you, that's helpful.
You're welcome.
Yes, Mr.
I
Thompson?
wanted to back up for just a second and ask if you could explain the difference between permitted and conditional use.
Sure.
Good question, I was going to ask you to do that.
Yes, when you have multiples of different zonings within any community. Say you have a residential zone, say we have an R1. Typically what's allowed in an R1, you have what's principally allowed straight out. So say you have an empty lot and somebody wants to come in and build a new house. That's what they principally is allowed to do. It doesn't have to go through any type of board, planning commission, or board of zoning appeals, anything for that. They have to apply for building permits, meet the proper setback requirements, and then we'd issue them a building permit. Now you have conditional uses within a residential area, for example, and some of them I think are probably a church, maybe a school, things like that. When you have a conditional use, that has to come in front of the planning commission. I'm sorry, the Board of Zoning Appeals isn't Mark. Board of Zoning Appeals. It comes in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals for a public hearing, and then property owners are notified of the hearing and a conditional use is being applied for it. So it comes in and allows them to voice an opinion for something or against it. And then there are conditions that they have to meet within the zoning code, conditional use standards. And then the Board of Zoning Appeals can put additional conditions on it if they so deem it's necessary.
Okay, that's great. That answers my question. I believe that this should have been allowed through conditional use. I totally understand the not wanting to have this permitted anywhere within the city. I understand the reasons of you stated for denying it. We talk underutilization. When we talk about underutilization, we've got a property here that's been vacant for, says in here, over 7 years. Greg had mentioned more than 10 years. You can't get much more underutilized.
Actually, probably not 10 years. It's probably about 8 years. I had the buildings removed myself.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, it's being very
It's been a while.
underutilized.
It has.
Yeah, it was very underutilized. As part of conditional use, I could see where you could factor in issues with maintenance, pest control, fertilizer, and runoffs. We're talking about a very small scale operation here.
Not necessarily.
Well, I'm looking at square feet.
But you're looking at one piece of property.
I am, and that's why it's conditional, because this would be with this one piece of property. And if you
Well,
allow
you have to
this,
understand, though, they don't do it that way. If you're going to do a conditional use, for example, and I don't mean to interrupt, but if you add a conditional use, a use under conditional uses, that applies for that whole zoning district that you're going to put that in. Not just up at Lawn. It could be right next to, like, in a residential area like Maryland's or Donna's or James's area. So it's not just that place. So you have to think broader on that.
no, I
It's not just
understand
that.
I understand that, but if anybody, just for an example, if somebody wanted to come put a garden in next to Marilyn's house, they would still have to come before the Board of Zoning and Appeals to make sure that they could use it conditionally, because it's not a primary R1. It's not, they would still have to get permission from the city to put this in wherever they decided to, if it was conditional.
Sure. And one of the reasons, some cities don't allow certain things as permitted or conditional is it's the old saying, once you get the camel's nose under the tent, pretty soon the whole camel's in the tent. So what happens is, it's very difficult to get something out of a zoning code once you get it in a zoning code.
No, I understand that, and I think that's a real concern, and I think that's why we have conditional uses for things, so that people can't go putting market gardens in every piece of vacant property within Norwood.
That's very true.
as long as-
There's also a reason that they don't allow it as certain things as conditional or permitted. They don't want it at all.
No, I understand that.
I understand where your argument's coming from. I'm just telling you what the Planning Commission's arguments were.
No, and that's
for not
totally,
doing it.
that's totally fine.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you where my perspective is on this.
I understand.
As far as the increase in pests and the fertilizer runoffs go, as we were saying, this is, I mean, I do recognize that this is business versus residential, but what we're talking is very small scale. Probably slightly larger in scale than somebody might have a backyard garden, but,
That's not necessarily true.
well, you could have a very large backyard garden, but if we have in our zoning codes allotted for, in residential areas, for people to have backyard gardens and use fertilizers and take care of pests on their own and maintain that on their own, I don't see why we couldn't expect a business to manage their fertilizers and manage the pests as well as we expect our residents to do that. So that would be my next point.
Well, sometimes it's difficult for the residents for some residents to maintain their own property.
Exactly, and we cite them and fine them.
We do.
And that's exactly what you would do for a business if they were failing to do that. And is that not correct?
Well, of course. We cite businesses all the time for property maintenance issues. But again, your argument's not with me. I understand what your argument is, that you are in favor of this. I can tell you from the Planning Commission's standpoint, it was not a 2-3, or it's a unanimous decision. So they felt very strongly that they did not want to take residential properties, and especially when it's just now, after 30 years, starting to get homes built, and letting, just because you have one person that wants to do a market garden from, a different location that she currently operates out of and wants to get a cheap piece of land from the land bank, they don't think it's appropriate to change the zoning code for that individual. And they don't think, because once you do that, it's not just for this person, it's a wide-reaching change.
But still has to come before the zoning board every single time somebody wanted to
If it's
do
a
it.
conditional use, sure.
If it's conditional use.
Sure.
Which is the point that I
But
made.
I understand, though, if it meets conditions, and you say, okay, well, let's add this as a conditional use, and you go ahead and add it, and it gets adopted. Normally, if it meets the conditional uses, they'll be hard pressed to deny it.
No matter what the neighbors say.
You got it. That's exactly right.
Neighbor, how many, curious, how many vacant properties do we have in Norwood?
We have pretty many. The city actually owns some. So we have quite a few. I would probably say, Mark, 10? As the city has, and we have other ones that are available. Like I said, we have the one now that's just got finished on a brand new house on Grove, and what was the other one, Mark?
Delaware Star.
Right, so we have 2 new homes, very exciting.
Third's going to be on that.
Yes.
No, that's great, and
Ashland, did you
we
say?
want that to happen. I'm curious, how many land bank owned properties in the city? Do
Oh,
we
I
know?
couldn't tell you. I'd have to ask the land bank. I really don't
didn't
know.
know.
I know we
I
just
didn't know.
added one because I saw a post that was, and kudos to Mr. Bonzo. He's sitting here, and I'll give him a kudos. I
Right,
think
yeah.
that's a good thing that he got that transferred over to land bank. So I'll give you it's very, very good on that, James.
Mr. Roars, I'm curious on the third page of your market gardening, at the very last paragraph says, and I'm trying to figure out how this happens. Cincinnati is currently proposing urban agriculture on a small scale in all zoning districts except industrial. Urban gardens, this is what kind of blows me away. Urban gardens allow properties to be utilized until market conditions call for redevelopment. The low impact of the garden allows for easy transition for infill. So are you saying they're allowing them until somebody else wants that land and then they're not allowed? I'm just curious what that
No,
means. Or is it just that until the market conditions improve that they want to buy the lands, they're going to allow this to happen?
Correct, the latter, Madam President. What it just means is that based on its nature of the plantings, it could easily be bulldozed, or once market conditions reach a certain level, I would imagine it would be advantageous for the individual who was operating the market garden to potentially sell the property. That's all that meant. And then you wouldn't have typically a structure or anything like that in the way.
Just wanted to clarify
Yep.
for the record.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Sanker?
We were talking about before about the underutilization of that particular piece of property. The city does not own that property. The city, when people come and ask for vacant lots, we kind of tell them where some are that we don't own, even though we have some we do own. So the city hasn't been marketing necessarily that piece of property for, like the building of a house and that over the past few years, because number one, we don't own the property. So the land bank owns it, so it would be up to them to try to market that. Ideally, you would think that the land bank would market it to someone who would want to build something on that property, for it would be better use or more dollars to them versus what they potentially are. I don't know what the actual selling price would be from the land bank to the individual, but it seems it would be a more valuable piece of property to land bank to market as something for building upon than something to put a garden on. Recently, the land bank has sent us some information, at least to Mr. Moore, and that they were interested in, all the different properties we have available. Well, yeah, we have been talking to them about that over the last couple of years, and all of a sudden now that the taxes are all paid off, now they're interested in taking them. Well, we were interested in them helping us out when the taxes weren't paid off to kind of move forward so they can market these properties. So they are in the, in a better position to really market that as a buildable lot, and why they haven't or what they've done, I can't say, but the city hasn't been able to really control that being underutilized, just because we don't own the property. So
Well, thanks for the clarity there.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I was just going to ask a question. Was Chris Brown at the Planning Commission meeting where this was tonight?
I'd have to go back and look at the minutes on it.
All right, that's all I have.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
I was wondering if Mark Reeves had anything to say on this. He's out in the community every day. Wouldn't know if you'd want
I was just going to ask you. And we also have Dr. Michaela Oldfield here. That maybe we'll hear from after we hear from her. You can go there, or you can come up here, whatever you want to do. If you're more comfortable seating. Thank you for arranging for the chairs, by the way.
Thanks to Tri-Health. If you haven't seen what's going on out in the city, a ton of residential remodeling from 3s and 2s back to 1s. The new price on remodeled houses in Norwood is $350 and up. We're probably going to get hit with $400,000 on a house at Ellesmere and Clenny. That'll be the new number. The new one on Grove is probably worth $400,000. I live on Spencer. I've got a 2-family being converted right next to me, 201. I don't know where all of you live, but I would prefer to have a $350,000 house with property taxes coming into the city, a husband and wife, hopefully, with jobs that are paying into the city, payroll taxes, than I would corn and beans being grown next to me. I don't think it belongs in a residential area. I don't understand the city of Cincinnati not allowing it in manufacturing, but if we're going to do it, I'd look at the M1 or the M2 district. I just think, I agree with Jerry, our land is too valuable. We're just now starting to rebuild, and there's no reason why we can't get some of these empty lots built on.
Questions of Mr. Reeves?
Actually, I have a question.
Mr. Bonzo?
What do you think the minimum lot size is that you would expect somebody to build a new house on in Norwood? Some of our lot sizes are pretty narrow, so I'm just curious about that.
Well, a typical lot in South Norwood is 50 by 150. The second house that's going up on Delaware, Planning Commission agreed to split off 8 feet of that so he could be granted a driveway to the 4-family that he owns adjacent. So he's got 42 feet that he's building on, and he's meeting all the setbacks. You're not going to be able to build, well,
Mark, we just did the one with the lot split for the...
that's a 50 by 140.
Right.
So the new lot split on Ashland, 50 feet wide. The one on Grove's 50 by 150. And that's a 2-car front-load garage, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, with an integral covered 20 by 20 patio on the back. It's beautiful. Probably be doing a ribbon cutting in a couple of weeks.
For which one? For which?
Please?
Which one are you doing a ribbon cutting on?
4219 Grove.
On the Grove, okay.
Yeah.
There had been a fire there?
It was they were both
Fire?
Grove and Delaware were fire demos.
Right.
The fires in both. The previous owners tore them down. New owners bought the lot, and
Rebuilt.
I think this is what we're going to see.
Mrs. Hanahan,
Yeah, I have a question with this.
can you speak into the microphone?
As I've been telling everybody else. Does, what we have here, would this permit any kind of structure on the property? Greenhouses, pole barns, anything like that? Was that addressed?
If you look at bullet point
I missed it.
12, accessory structures shall be constructed to the satisfaction of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Greg, do you
Well,
want to
please.
speak to that?
Yeah, I think that any of these conditions or staff recommendations, obviously, just as if you choose to approve or not approve it, in the end, are to the discretion of council. So you can adjust any of these. But this, as the recommendation, they could have that through the Board of Zoning Appeals. Or if you head down that direction, you could say no accessory structures permitted. So there's, none of these are really set in stone. So, if that helps.
And what are the, Mark or Jerry, accessory structures, can you speak to those? What are the conditions that you have to meet for accessory
Sure,
structures?
typically you have them located...
Percentage of land?
Yeah, typically you have them located in on a regular residential lot, you have a principal permitted structure, which is the house, and then you have an accessory structure, which could be the shed or the garage, things of that nature. And typically, you don't allow an accessory structure on a lot by itself. But under this, it would allow, like you could have like a little greenhouse, and you can imagine, I always imagine the worst case scenarios because I've seen them. The plastic little greenhouse that you can buy inexpensive that gets ripped up in the storm and half of the plastic's hanging there for a year. You could have an accessory shed for tools, things like that. They can ask for things like that, maybe storage of fertilizers, anything they might be using on that type of market garden.
I had to get a variance when we built our gazebo, when my husband built his gazebo, because of a percentage or so many square feet or something like that was allowable, so.
Yeah, I think it's the way accessory structures are on residential properties. It's I'm going to quote it wrong, but it's a certain percentage or 600 square feet, whichever is bigger. It used to be whichever was smaller.
And
We
that's
changed
where I
that.
got caught into. Yeah, thank you.
We've changed that.
We changed that.
Thank you very
If you
much.
applied today, you would have got it.
Other comments? Yes, Mr. Bonso.
Thank you, Madam President. I was just, a question to Mr. Stoker. I was just curious, if you could, I know that you're the building commissioner in other communities as well, and I don't know how many, but can you speak to if this kind of application would have come into some of those other communities? Can you speak to what would have happened there? Are they permitted, or would it have not been permitted?
Well, I do it for, I do it for Newtown, St. Bernard, Deer Park, and North College Hill, and I can tell you currently they're not allowed in those areas. You have agricultural designations, but then you have to have certain size property for agricultural to take place. So it wouldn't be something that they would allow on a standard lots, no.
Dr. Oldfield, would you like to come forward? Didn't realize it until this evening, but I did get an email from Ms. Stevenson saying that Dr. Michaela Oldfield is here, the director of the Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council of Green Umbrella. If you would like to come forward and give us a perspective on, you can come up here and sit if you would like, or you can come to stand at the microphone, whichever you feel more comfortable.
I spend most of my day sitting, so take advantage of this. Can you hear me? Is it coming in? Or do I need to sit and talk louder?
Until the air conditioning.
Until the air conditioning comes on, you're fine.
Wave your hand so I start yelling when the AC comes on. So the Regional Food Policy Council is a cross-sector collaborative of businesses, government leaders, and nonprofits who are interested in advocating for a healthy, equitable, sustainable food system. We have been involved in the zoning code revisions going through in the city of Cincinnati because Councilmember Flynn last June introduced a motion directing the planning department to authorize agriculture throughout the city as a conditional use. And so the planning department said, let us review what our current code is, what the potential issues are, and we'll sort of put a proposal back. So that's still in process. But a lot of the sort of things that they're looking at is allowing market gardens and community gardens throughout the different residential districts with limits. Some of the limits are quite similar to what you proposed here, and recognizing that the land uses are being, the concerns of things like rodents and light and neglect and nuisancey looking buildings are addressed through other parts of the code, such as the public health code. So the Food Policy Council is generally in support of rules and regulations that would allow for more agricultural production throughout more parts of the community. We see it as a valuable land use because it actually has been shown that it can increase property values because it activates vacant spaces and reduces crimes and creates an accountable landlord that you really know who that person is and what they're intending to do with the property. It also can transition properties into active interim uses until the property values rise enough to develop. So exactly what you were saying, that once a property is, the neighboring properties are in high enough demand, then a developer will buy up that land because the profit margins on running urban agriculture oftentimes are really just not nearly what a house is worth. So we also see it as something that supports small businesses and small entrepreneurs. And it's a way to increase healthy food access for some members of the community, although I think sometimes you might hear that stated as an overstatement, that it certainly is shown to do it, but it doesn't create total community food security. So I've also shared with Ms. Stevens a document called Vacant Lots to Vibrant Plots, which came out about 2 years ago and does a review of the literature on urban agriculture and what benefits it offers and what the potential trade-offs and concerns are. So that's our resource that's available, and I'm also happy to act as a resource and provide my experience or knowledge on other issues as you guys sort of try to work out how to manage these land uses in your community. And I had worked with April Ann and given her a lot of resources that were what informed what she sort of was submitting to the Planning Commission and what her request was. Although I will say she did an enormous amount of research on her own, so I shouldn't take too much credit for what she was doing, but she is a friend and actually my farmer, so.
Questions of Dr. Oldfield or comments?
So,
I have a couple.
Okay, go ahead.
First of all, how does the, you're talking about the market garden, so I assume Cincinnati requires the market garden owners to screen their employees, because some of these are transient, so they screen them for any type of background checks? So how do you know what's coming in the neighborhood?
same as anyone could walk into the neighborhood anyways.
No, I'm just asking the question. Since Cincinnati is in support of this as a zone change for conditional use on properties in residential areas, I would assume that they probably would have put some extra safeguards on there requiring the business owner to do criminal background checks on who they're hiring. So somebody might get that property burglarized, and if somebody who's transient and just working on an hourly wage. That's my question, first question. And secondly, I think there's a difference between a community garden, Victory Garden, and a for-profit market garden. We had a Victory Garden here for a little while. I think you all remember it over at Linden Point. It was very nice when it first started out, and then it wasn't maintained. You saw what happened to it. So just some of you may remember that. Some of them new on council may not know about that. Just a couple of comments. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
Can I respond?
Sure, sure.
So, in terms of employment and transients, so I've not heard of the city of Cincinnati talking about trying to address that. That's honestly a novel concern I've heard about market gardens in general. Often they're used as a way to create jobs and opportunities for people, but if you really want it, I could go ahead and try to do some research and find that out, because if that's a concern for you, I'm happy.
So it's not a concern for me. I'm just asking the question because you're quoting the city of Cincinnati's and saying how they've not had any issues. So I always bring that to mind, because it's not just the business owner that we're looking at. We're looking at the existing neighborhoods that people that own the homes, not a business that's coming in just plowing the land, getting some vegetables, taking the vegetables someplace else, maybe not even the city of Norwood, and selling those. And that's just my comment. And I'm curious if there was any issues or any thought process, or did anybody ever bring that up in the past?
I've not heard of it, but that doesn't mean...
Wouldn't you think that'd be a good idea? I would want to know, if there's a criminal element coming into my community. And how do you know that?
I guess that's not something that I see as a concern with community gardens, given what I have seen with community gardens and market gardens.
But you have to realize that the business owner can hire whoever they want, right?
Yeah.
Does any other existing Norwood business owner, are they allowed to hire anybody that they want?
Well, I can tell you, if I was a business owner, I'd be doing criminal background checks on
but do they have to?
Again, this is coming in front of the Planning Commission, or coming in front of council to change the zoning code. So I'm trying to point out different pitfalls that y'all should think about. That's the reason I'm here, not just to bring forth what the Planning Commission had stated in regards to the reasons that they denied it, but also thoughts that you all might want to think about that we didn't even discuss.
No, and that's great, but I think it's a little unfair to raise a kind of issue on this particular kind of business where we've got businesses all over the city and all parts of our community that, unless Norwood requires them to do criminal background checks.
Well,
are you worried that BP on the corner is hiring criminals? Do they do criminal background checks? Or are you worrying that UDF somewhere?
Well, I can tell you, if I have a piece of property that was next to my house, this is how this is how I'll comment to you on. If I had a piece of property next to my house, and this was coming in front of where I live for a change, this is one of the things that I would be bringing up to my Planning Commission and my trustees. And how are you going to regulate this? Yes, it would be a concern, absolutely.
Okay. And has Norwood as a city addressed this kind of concern on any other business?
Couldn't tell you.
I would say the sort of more comparable businesses that I would imagine that are bringing in transient people to my neighborhood are entities like my appliance repair companies or a moving company that comes in and helps you load a truck or not.
I think that's a little bit different, and let me tell you why. Because they're probably more full-time. We used to have, and we've outlawed that in this community, on day labor. They specifically outlawed that. They used to have that because that was one of the concerns. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, I guess one thing
Mr. Bonzo,
on that, oh, sorry, but when you're talking about most businesses
we'll get to you eventually.
would do a background check if anybody's ever had a job interview recently, most companies do a background check to begin with, to make sure that they're not hiring somebody with some type of background that might be detrimental to their business, because it's going to be detrimental to the business, and then that harms them. However, one of the things to point out in this too, this is a business that's being proposed to be put in a residential area. Most of the businesses that are out here now that are in residential, they've been grandfathered in. So it's a little different, where you got a business that you're hiring somebody and putting them right in next door to in a residential area. So that, kind of plays a little part too. The other thing, when you hire somebody to come do work at your house, their business is not located next door to you. They come in, do the work, they go home. They're not employed every day right next to your home in your neighborhood in a residential area. So it's kind of a little difference in
Yeah, it's
service
hard to
company
find a
comes.
perfect
No,
comparison,
hey,
yeah.
if life was perfect, we wouldn't be here.
Thank you, Madam President.
Believe me.
I mean, I personally find this line of questioning to be, I'm very perplexed by it. I mean, of all the reasons that you can point out not to have a market garden, and there are some very compelling ones. I mean, the very first one that Mr. Stoker mentioned about not wanting to have buildable lots underutilized, I mean, I find that extremely compelling. However, to talk about the crime aspect of the employees, I mean, I just don't understand. But I would say that if we wanted to, I mean, if that were the only issue and everything else was good, and we wanted to put in a line saying employees have to get a background check, have at it. I mean, if that's the only thing, have at it. But I just had a question though. So, Mr. Stoker, before, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't have any hookah shops in the city, and I think there was always an understanding that the hookah shops, if you look at any rational person, I had always assumed that looking at the zoning code, they wouldn't have been allowed. But you had, classified them in there as like a tea shop or something, where I don't exactly know how they are classified in. But my question is, did you require, because the hookah shop right there at Lawn Avenue and Montgomery Road, I mean, there's houses right behind that. Did you require them to have to get background checks for their employees?
No, it's a principally permitted use.
But why wouldn't
And it
you
wasn't asking to come in front for a zone change, and it wasn't asking to have a piece of land next to a residential house used as a business for farming.
But you should know the risks, though, of having crime in the neighborhood. I mean, there's houses
So
right
are you
behind
saying
it.
that a hookah shop allows crime?
I'm saying that there's a risk. I think there's just as much of a risk of crime happening at a hookah shop as there is at a market garden.
Well, I'm not here to argue that
And
point
so-
with you. All I'm saying is, if I don't point out the things for you to consider, it's not my decision, but my job is to point these things out to you all. And it's your decision ultimately, it's not mine. But if I don't point those out to you, whether you agree with them or not, James, I'm not doing my job.
Okay. So I'll just, for the record, just note that I do not see that as a concern. So thank you.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Stoker, and then I also have a question as you direct for Dr. Oldfield. As you're raising concerns for us to think about in the general process of council has an ordinance before us to pass or not pass, edit, what have you, is it your expectation that council, if we want, would on our own resolve the concerns? Or are you in a position, when you're helping us think through these different outages, to make recommendations as well?
No, I would not make a recommendation for you to approve or disapprove. That's up to the Planning Commission.
I'm not talking about approve or disapprove. You just made a very good point.
Yes?
You're here to help us think about things.
Yes.
And so my question is, in your helping us think, are you also able to help us think of remedies, or is your role just to help pose questions?
My role is to pose the questions to you, to state what the Planning Commission decided and the reason they decided, and then to add some additional things that I think you all want to consider if you are looking to overturn the recommendations of the Planning Commission.
Okay, so can I follow up to that? And then maybe we need to consult the law department. What would be the appropriate step for council to take, Madam Chair, for us to present what we think could be resolved if we decide to go that route?
What is before you is the resolution, the ordinance denying the request for the zone change text amendment to add market gardens as a permitted or conditional use. That's what's before you. We have to act on their recommendation one way or the other. You either have to accept that recommendation or you have to reject it.
I'm clear on
And
that.
then, if you reject their recommendation, then it would be up to council or committee or someone to put together an ordinance or conditions or proposed language changes that council would then consider.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. Can we, just a question maybe to Mr. Stoker, to yourself, can we put any conditions on an approval? Can we put additional conditions over what are already here on an approval?
That would be a question you'd have to direct, Madam President, you have to direct that to the law department.
Just a follow-up question then. So if we deny it, just in the zoning code, Mr. Stoker, you and I have talked about this at least once, about how it kind of sets up
I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, but I'm sure you do.
I do.
And so, okay, so anyways, the question though is that if we were to reject it and we were to create a new ordinance or a new resolution asking Planning Commission to take action, so to reconsider, what would happen if Planning Commission just doesn't consider it, just doesn't approve or reject our resolution to ask them to make a change?
Again, that's probably a best question asked by the law director, James. I've never run into that before. I've seen it where, and Donna, I think you've probably seen it too, and Marilyn maybe, where you've sent something back to the Planning Commission for reconsideration.
I don't remember that.
I don't think that. I think
I may be thinking of something else, but but you could always I guess deny it, and at the same time ask to reconsider a different type of market garden with different criteria on it. You could do something like that.
Sure. I guess the concern that I'm having is that the previous council, on one occasion, sent a resolution to the Planning Commission requesting them to consider, I think it had to do with structures in the front yard or swing sets in the front yard or whatever it was. And council never, in that entire period, I think we heard maybe a little feedback, but we never actually received a denial or basically, are they going to accept our recommendation or deny our recommendation? So my just concern is that if it's being suggested that the process is that we send something to the Planning Commission to consider if we want to change it, that it's going to just get stuck because in Planning Commission purgatory for who knows how long, and that we won't actually ever then come back and be able to act on it. And so it's just a concern I have in our zoning code, because I think the zoning code allows that to happen, and so it's something that I think as council we should probably take up at some point. But I just want to make sure. I just wanted to know if that was your opinion as well. So.
Again, it'd be better directed to the law department on it.
Okay.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
I have to agree with Mr. Bonsall. We've had stuff sitting there for well over a year, just sitting there, nothing being done. And we worked very hard on getting those proposals together. And I think we do need to look at the process. But I do have a question here. I'm thinking about, okay, I'm living here in my house, and I end up with an empty lot next to me, and all of a sudden, I've got a market garden coming in. And I'm concerned about the aesthetics, and I just think this is what is this going to look like in the middle of winter? I go to Indiana and farm country every week, and a lot of the places aren't real pretty in the winter. So am I going to be sitting next to a mud hole all winter long when it's not growing season? Or, if this got passed or something, I would think under maintenance that would have to be addressed. Because I think the aesthetics of what you have right next to you is really important when you own a home. And that would be my concern, is the aesthetics. And even, you figure what, 9 months most you're growing things? And, the beginning and the end aren't pretty either usually. So those would be my, some of my concerns. Would be the aesthetics of it. There would have to be guidelines for the aesthetics before I would want to approve any of that.
Mr. Bonso?
Thank you, Madam President. Maybe one thing that we could consider is maybe giving the Board of Zoning Appeals, or at least having them, instead of it to be an unlimited conditional use, maybe they have to come back every 2 years or every so often and reapply, to continue operating in that manner. And then at that point, maybe if there's been issues, then it gives residents another chance, because they'll have chances before it comes in, but you never know after it goes in. Maybe there could be a time period where we'd ask them to come back. Have you heard of that? Is there any other processes like that?
Not that I'm aware of. But I think that Marilyn brings up a good point, though. Say you have a market garden next to your house, and the person goes belly up, the business goes belly up. The property just sits there like that. So who's going to maintain that?
Who maintains the vacant lots today?
Who maintains the vacant lots today?
Yeah.
The property owner, but if the property owner goes belly up, who's going to maintain it? It ends up as a burden on the community. That's what happens.
Does that happen today, though, in vacant lots?
Yes.
Sure it does. Public Works maintains it.
Public Works.
They pay,
We pay for it.
and then
And then they put it on the
you
tax
try to have to
bill.
collect it on the taxes, which may not get paid right away on it, James. So they do try to get reimbursed. They put a lien on the properties. But again, the outflow of cash and equipment and manpower is what the city has to end up putting forth. And we do that now. So it's just another thing to consider.
Comments, Dr. Wilson? Anything? Give you an opportunity.
The last line of questioning with the concerns about the property maintenance, I think that's often people's concern is what's it going to look like, especially, and I think in the winter especially. I would say you probably are going to be looking at open dirt. You're not going to be looking at lawn the way when you're in the winter when your neighbor is, obviously their lawn's not growing. You're not going to be looking at dried grass. You're going to be looking at probably planting beds with mulch or some kind of material in between the planting beds. My experience is market gardens, people are talking about very high value specialty crop production, so tomatoes, lettuces, beans, that kind of thing, not the sort of corn and soy that you see out in Indiana. So it is slightly different, but if you think about what your neighbor's vegetable garden looks like in the different times of year, and you imagine that on
Much larger
much of a
scale.
lot,
Much larger scale.
you're
Much
probably
larger
imagining
scale, yeah.
the right sort of what it's going to look like. There's ways people try to deal with that. There's screening requirements. There's of course maintenance requirements of things like you have to have all dead plant material removed by such and such a date, or get permission from your neighbors to allow it to continue after that or something. I think maybe another way to deal with the concerns about if someone goes belly up or like abandons the land would be you create it as a conditional use, but also create a market garden license. So someone has to get a license every year. So if you do have a landowner or a market manager who has been a bad neighbor, they don't get their license renewed the next year. I've heard of
But
that.
how does that help in regards to if they go belly up and the property is sitting there like that? That doesn't, you can charge a license, excuse me, and you can charge a license whether it's $1,000 or whether it's $500 or whether it's $100. That doesn't, okay, you take the license away. The land's still sitting there. It's not being maintained, ma'am, so how would you do that?
You're talking about land that's currently not being maintained?
That's not true. The grass is being cut.
By public dollars.
Right.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, not all.
I love this one.
So if we're talking about land bank properties,
Yeah, and a land bank's supposed to be cutting it,
yeah, which is public dollars.
right?
So we're talking about vacant properties that are currently being maintained by public dollars that people want to purchase and put into active use.
Again, but the argument, though, from the planning commission is that's an underutilization of the land. When you could have a brand-new house or a building there, if it's a business community, or if it's a business zoning, then you could have jobs coming in, you could have people moving in, you could have earnings tax coming in, you can have investment in the property. If you have a investment in the property on a piece of land where all you're doing is plowing it, putting some grass, or putting some seed in there, that's not that much of an investment, I can tell you it's not.
Which is what makes it very easy for higher value uses to take over that property in the future when there is someone who wants to use that land. So in the interim, you have someone using the vacant land and it's not on the public coffers.
If somebody buys the land, they own the land now. Okay? So I don't know how the city of Cincinnati is doing it, but if somebody comes in and I buy a piece of land, and you can tell me I can put a market garden in there as conditional use, and all of a sudden you find out that, hey, somebody wants to put a house on there, Mr. Stoker, we want you to sell that property, you can't have that conditional use anymore. That's hard, but I like to see the language that's, since the city of Cincinnati's done to take that person's use of that land away, with that conditional use that you've already granted to that person, and make them do something else with it. I'd love to see that language.
I think that's probably based on the market,
That's what I asked.
the market value of that land goes up when the need to build houses or whatever.
Right, but you can't, but the community, but the government's not going to dictate that.
No, and you can't force a person to sell land
That's what
if they
I'm
don't
saying.
want
There's no
to.
guarantee that that person's ever going to sell that land. They're going to continue to use it as a garden if they want to.
They could.
Right. Just trying to point out the pitfalls, because I don't want this nice lady to leave here giving us a perception that all of a sudden that could be changed.
Nobody's
Government-
suggesting,
and the
I don't
government
think
can change
she,
it and
was given
say,
that perception.
well,
I
you
don't
have
think
to-
she
you have to-
suggested that it could be changed. I think what she suggested is the same thing that Mr.
what
Rose
I
pointed out,
clarified.
was that when market conditions change, there's a higher value on that property, that person might want to sell it rather than have it garden.
Maybe, maybe not. But
Well,
again,
I mean, we've got a
there's no
piece of land that's
there's no
been sitting for
requirement
8 years doing nothing.
Well,
And 30 years since we had a house built until this year, was that right? 30
right.
years? So
Two.
you're talking, great.
Two. Third one
And I'm
on the way.
excited for that, and I
That's
want
right.
that. But you're talking about holding on to this land for what now has been 30 years
no, it's not 30 years.
total
It's
since
been
somebody...
8 years.
8 years, 30 years since anybody built a new property, a new house.
Right.
So that's a very long time to wait on undeveloped land in the hopes that it will be developed.
Well, there's not just the hopes. Here's what council did in the past, and you weren't on council yet, so you may not be aware of this, or you may. But in council's wisdom, in 2009, we created a CRA locally here. And that CRA, that tax abatement program, is not just for businesses. It's for brand new houses. Hence the reason that you have 2 new homes and a third one getting built. They entice builders and new property owners to build on a brand new house. And you build a brand new house in the city of Norwood, and that building is over 120, I think it's 125,000. Is that right, Mark? 175,000. Cost of that, you get 100% tax abatement for 10 years. So it's an enticement to do that. That's the reason you're
It's
doing
an
it.
additional 10 years until we see any money from it.
You don't see how much money from it now in regards to property tax. For example, property tax, if you go onto the Hamilton County Auditor's webpage, they have a pie chart. And they'll show you the small little portion of that pie chart that actually goes to the city of Norwood.
Exactly.
The rest of it goes for either MSD, the zoo, levies, you name it, so, or the school, okay? But in the meantime, though, you have a new family that moves in, and then you do have the earnings tax, and you have the investment, and you have children that are going to grow here, and then you have, hopefully, they will stay, and then it becomes infectious, and it'll feed on each other. Once we had the one house, and I was in the office with Mark, I bet you we have another house, and we did. And then he says, I bet you have another one, and we have a third one. And we're actually to the point now, which it's kind of contentious between Greg and I and another member of the Planning Commission about guidelines we want to put on new single-family homes. And it's a good argument back and forth, because we never had that type of argument about what do we do on design standards for new houses, because we never had any. We never had any. And now you're looking at trying to take the land that the houses can be built on and underutilize it for a garden. So I'm trying to point all these things out to you. Ultimately, it's your decision, it's not mine. But you don't want to, if you have a trend going for new houses, you don't want to cut it off, because they'll find someplace else to go.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. Dr. Oldfield, you mentioned that the city of Cincinnati is awaiting review of the policy from the building department, I believe you said there. Maybe you said another department. I'm just curious, do you have any sense of their timeline?
Yeah, so we've been working with the zoning department. They convened the building department, zoning department, law department, and public health, and invited
Can you say
us.
those again?
Zoning and planning, law, public health, and the building department. And Office of Environmental Sustainability, which runs the urban agriculture program out of the city of Cincinnati. And me, and some representatives from the sort of urban agriculture community in Cincinnati, to talk about how urban agriculture, what the sort of activities are that you typically see associated with it, what the concerns are with those activities, and then to identify where in the code those activities are already addressed, and then to talk about how to manage those land uses so that current property owners and residential communities are protected. So we've gone through that process and have a sort of draft proposal written up, and I am waiting to hear back from the zoning department about some final tweaks they were wanting to make about the density of animals that would be permitted and things like how to deal with hoop houses. So those like low tunnels that you see with the plastic that in the storms can get messed up. So they are really concerned about that also and want to make sure that we're not seeing that kind of building happen in neighborhoods and just get left up for like years. So I'm not sure what their timeline is because there's been some other stuff happening in the city of Cincinnati around zoning codes that has become a higher priority for city council people. So the other thing to note about the city of Cincinnati is they already do allow community gardens to a certain extent in a lot of residential neighborhoods, the ones that are at minimum 6,000 square feet per lot, so the 6, 10, and 20,000 residential neighborhoods. The city already allows community gardens in neighborhoods that have 6, 10, and 20,000 square foot lots. And if you go and look at their definition of a community garden, it would include a market garden, as is being talked about here. And that's been on the books in the city of Cincinnati for 8 or 10 years. So what they're talking about now is making it so you can do gardens in more parts of the city, so in the smaller residential lots and possibly in some of the more urban districts, like the CBDs and stuff. Frankly, I don't see them happening in the CBDs given land value. And then they've been having conversations about allowing animals. So, which, as I read this, you're not talking about allowing any animals. So,
You what?
as I read this, I don't see animals being permitted as part of this. I just see fruits and vegetables.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Madam President. This is a question.
Again, speak into the microphone.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank
With the
you.
air conditioner on.
Right. This is a question for either maybe Mr. Stoker or Mr. Bonzel. I know you guys have had conversations with the land bank. Is there plans to market the properties that the land bank owns in the city to potential developers, or do you know of any plans that they have to do that?
I have not had any conversations with the land bank, unless James has had some. I have not had any conversations on their marketing strategy. I know, like I said, the city owns some, and that's going to be up to council on how they want to deal with the ones that we currently own, and if we want to, put those out for sale or not. But James, unless you've had some conversations, I have not.
Mr. Bonson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I guess just overall comment on this. I think that the applicant that applied for this zoning change, I think she's the one that, just basically expressed interest to the land bank about wanting to use it for this. The land bank, in my opinion, from what I've heard, I thought they had reached out to the city of Norwood. They want some assurances to the city of Norwood that they wanted that to be, that they were okay with that transfer. So I would say, if you don't like in the specific location that you think that place is going to be a place that there's definitely going to be a house built, then reach out to the land bank and talk to them and bring something else to them and let them decide how to get rid of it. But because they're not, somebody doing a market garden is not, if there's just an auction for a vacant property, a vacant lot, I mean, I don't see them if there's potential for real estate investors to build a house there, or for somebody to buy it and build a house on their own there. I don't see that this market garden people being able to outbid people that are wanting to build a single family house. I mean, so I guess that the thing is, this one the government owns right now, the property, specific property the government owns, and so maybe it's just that might not be the best use for it now. Maybe somebody should reach out to them about it. But I think that there's still a potential though.
Well, James, let's look at it a different way. You say, well, the government owns it, nobody's really wanting to put a house on it. Well, if we use that analogy, let's say, well, the city has a bunch of them, let's go ahead and sell those to the people, and then they put market gardens on those. We've really not had anybody that are breaking down the doors that wants to build houses on the lots we own, Mr. Stoker. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's the same scenario. But we own ones on Kenilworth, you have them all over the community, so let's go ahead and do the same thing, and let's go ahead and put market gardens on those.
That's not the point I was making. The point I was making is that...
I understand that's not the point you were making, but that's the analogy. It's the same thing.
I think the analogy is that, the point that I was making is that maybe in this specific instance, the government hasn't done, or the land bank hasn't marketed it properly. Maybe that they could have marketed it a different way to entice a single family owner. And that's the same thing, and I think that's the reason why the city wants to auction off their vacant lots, so that the highest, presumably the people that want to spend the most money on the property are the people that are willing to bring it to its highest use. I mean,
I agree with you on that. I think, and if I misunderstood you, I apologize, but I think that's the way to go in regards to how the city would want to do it. If it was me that owned land, okay, and I'm not saying this is how the city should do it, but if it was me that owned all those properties, and I wanted to say, okay, I want to sell these properties. However, here's the contingent I'm putting on the property. I'm going to sell you this piece of property at this dollar amount, with the contingency that you have to build a single-family home on there. Not anything else. You have to put a single-family house, and I'll sell you it for this amount of money. And then you have to sign an agreement stating you're going to do that. If you don't start that house within, they say, a year, well, then you'll be in breach of that contract. And that lot's going to revert back to the community. That's how what kind of contingencies I'd put on it. And if I was the land bank, because the land bank doesn't necessarily really, they own those lots, and they probably own a lot of lots.
Oh, sure.
So they're not really, in my opinion, necessarily concerned about the city of Norwood's prosperity. They just want to dump the land.
I don't know.
And I may be wrong, but I think, and she's a very nice lady that wants to do this. I think she probably had a contact that she knows at the land bank, knew the property was available, and put in an offer for it. Simple as that. I don't think they went out and marketed it to her.
Oh, right.
I think she probably knew that the land was available. Because her contacts. That's all.
Mrs. Hanrahan, did you have your hand up before?
Yes, I did. If this were to go through, I would think the standards, I just think they're way too broad here. In my ward, I have there's several, but two of them where the gentleman cultivated perennials. And I am sure most of you have gotten, the new ones might not, emails, calls.
I've been out on that one, Meryl.
There we go. We worked on this last year, many, many meetings. There was absolutely no way. You were at the meetings, Mr. Bonzel, you were at the meetings. We couldn't come up with a way to get this taken care of, and the neighbors are yelling and screaming. Well, it's being taken care of now. But it was a mess for the neighborhood. And there was nothing the city could do to make this man, I don't want to say clean up his lot, beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
You cannot legislate good taste. I say that often.
The neighbors were just having a fit, and there was nothing. Am I right, guys? There was nothing the city could do?
You're right.
When I was the health commissioner, there was nothing I could do. That was
and if the health commissioner was
over
here,
10
the
years
health
ago.
department, he had been fighting this property for what, 10, 12 years? If not that long. And there's two of them. So that would be my concern, and I would think that would have to be, I mean, very specific in any guidelines.
It's funny you brought that up, Marilyn. When I lived in Fairfield, I had a house exactly like that next to me that I lived next to. And I even had the city manager up to my house. And they said, Jerry, there's nothing we can do. We even passed an ordinance and years ago before that person was even the city manager. And it was called natural plantings. So
And
the
just
whole
recently, I
backyard
had a
looked like a
call
bunch
about
of
the
flowers and
poison
weeds,
ivy
and really,
growing over.
you couldn't tell
But they
after a
did
while
cut
the
that
weeds from the
up.
flowers, but it was natural plantings, and you really couldn't do a whole lot
Can't do
to
anything.
it. But it was just so unsightly.
Yeah.
Mr. Ponsel?
Yeah, it just strikes me, if this kind of nuisance can happen, at a single-family home, I mean, why are we even allowing these things to be built here at this point? If we can
I'm
have,
sorry?
why are we allowing these single-family homes to be built if there's this kind of nuisance that can be
Well,
allowed at that?
that's why you have property maintenance
Yeah.
code, so we can try to address, but you're not going to address it all though, James. I mean, there's always something like this, like Marilyn's talking, that it falls in those areas where, as Donna said, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. What I might think looks nice, somebody might say that's absolutely terrible, Jared. It's like when I try to, go outside and dress myself for the day, and my wife says, "You're not going to wear that tie, are you?" Well, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I think she probably is better at picking up clothes than I am. I know she is. She has better taste than I do. But that's one reason that, somebody might say a pink house is ugly and a pink house is pretty. Can't dictate taste.
Mr. Reeves, you've been real quiet. Anything you want to add?
Well, it would be oversimplification. I mean, to me, it just comes back to where I see Norwood heading with these new houses, the prices, the young people moving in with kids. It's wonderful. I mean, we are encouraging single families. We're not allowing people to increase the density any longer. You can't take a single family and make it a 2. That's a good thing. And maybe not everyone, almost every one of these vacant properties that Norwood has are all buildable. You can build something on it. You can build a single family. There's a ton of designs out there. And that's what we should be encouraging. I mean, I'm tickled pink that on Spencer Avenue I have a single family that's going to be $300,000 without the $25,000 garage, and it's a house and a family with a young son. So I'd much rather have that than I love gardens, but not in place of a house in a residential area.
Mr. Orrs? Comments?
Yeah, I think there's been definitely valid discussion on both sides. This, if approved or allowed, I guess, the way would allow the market, as we've discussed, to determine the value of the land. But there also is potential nuisances that could come up as well. So I think that's council's sort of issues to sort of look at and determine in their eyes. So it's a tough one.
Dr. Oldfield?
I would just say that land use is regulated at the local level because it's up to local government to figure out what's really best for the community and to understand where the community is going. And it's a value judgment of it's in the eye of the beholder. So I stand here to try to provide the information I have on what I have seen with other communities that have tried to do urban agriculture or community gardens or market gardens. Obviously, I stand here with a position that I support that kind of policy, but it's a value decision for you all to make of whether or not you think it's the right kind of land use that fits into the neighborhoods and direction that you see your city going.
Mr. Stoker?
Oh, I don't have any other comments unless y'all have some questions for me.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Before we leave, did we want to have a general discussion about where we want to go next with this? Like, is there somebody that's willing to
Can't take any votes, but we can certainly discuss. Yes, Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. And in light of the discussion, I'd like to consult with the law department in order to further define what next steps could look like. I think that some of what was shared seemed to leave a question mark between the role of council in accepting or rejecting the ordinance as proposed versus amending the ordinance, and then secondarily or subsequently, what is the process and/or law department's purview on council passing an ordinance that would address what we perceive as valuable, not valuable, conditional, whatnot, and then how that would impact or not impact what the planning condition does with future applications of the same kind.
The ordinance is placed in the committee of the whole, and I'm not prepared to move it out at this point in time. I mean, I think we can report out who reported what, information given, and continue to keep it in the committee of the whole until you all are ready to, we can discuss it, certainly discuss it on council floor, but until you all are ready to move it out one way or the other, it'll stay in committee of the whole. Ms. Stevenson.
With that in mind, do you have a preference on whether we discuss with the law department at a council meeting or invite law department to come to a committee meeting?
My guess is that the law department would prefer to do it at a meeting since they're here, as opposed to another meeting for them to come to. Sometimes it's difficult, as with, again, trying to get them to come here to discuss the union negotiations. Neither one of them were available, but they already have council meetings on the agenda. So I think just in terms of availability, council meetings seem to be a better option. That's my opinion in trying to schedule meetings with them. Ms. Stevenson?
That's great direction. I would just ask if we could let them know that we are not yet ready to report out that item, but in maybe reporting out the committee report. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could let them know we might anticipate hearing their feedback during that discussion time.
I will include that in the committee report.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, if not, we will adjourn the committee of the whole meeting. Thank you. Thank you all for attending and for the information.